A Bulgarian journalist named Georgy Markov is walking to his job at the BBC. It's 6:30 in the evening rush hour, hundreds of people around him. Markov is a defector. He's been broadcasting criticism of the Bulgarian communist regime from London, and he knows they want him dead. So he's careful, vigilant. He's standing at a bus stop when he feels it, a sharp sting on the back of his right thigh. Like someone poked him. He spins around and sees a man with an umbrella rushing away, apologizing in a thick foreign accent. The man drops the umbrella, fumbles to pick it up, then jumps into a taxi that's been waiting, and he's gone. Markov looks at his leg. There's a tiny puncture mark, a small red spot. It looks like nothing, a mosquito bite maybe. He gets on his bus and goes home. By that night, he's got a fever. By morning, he's in the hospital. 3 days later, Georgy Markov is dead. The autopsy finds something extraordinary. A tiny metal pellet, smaller than a pinhead, lodged in his leg. It's got microscopic holes drilled in it and traces of ricin, one of the deadliest poisons known to man. 2 holes, each 0.35 millimeters across, designed to hold the poison. The pellet was coated with wax that would melt at body temperature, releasing the ricin into his bloodstream. It was an assassination. Carried out in broad daylight on a crowded London street with a weaponized umbrella that fired a poison pellet. An umbrella. Now here's the thing. That umbrella assassination, that wasn't the CIA. That was the KGB working with Bulgarian intelligence. The CIA? They'd been doing this kind of thing for years, and they'd gotten way more creative. Poison pens that could kill with a click. Cigars laced with botulinum toxin. A gun that could shoot a frozen poison dart and cause an undetectable heart attack. Exploding seeds. Toxic wetsuits, lethal lipstick. During the Cold War, the CIA's Technical Services Division had an entire laboratory dedicated to one purpose: developing ways to kill people that looked like accidents or natural causes. Most of this stayed secret until 1975, when congressional hearings forced the CIA to reveal their arsenal. And what they showed shocked the world. That thing? That's what they called the heart attack gun. And it's just the beginning. Today, we're going into the CIA's secret weapons lab. We're going to examine the gadgets they built, the people they targeted, and the question nobody wants to answer. How many people died from weapons that were never supposed to exist? Let's start with the man who made it all possible. A chemist who believed he could turn everyday objects into instruments of death. His name was Sidney Gottlieb, and he was very, very good at his job. Sidney Gottlieb looked like someone who should be teaching chemistry at a community college. Soft-spoken, wore thick glasses, had a club foot that gave him a noticeable limp. But from 1951 to 1973, this mild-mannered chemist ran one of the most secretive and morally questionable programs in CIA history. He was the head of the Technical Services Division, the TSD. Think of it as the CIA's version of Q Branch from James Bond, except everything Q made is fiction. Gottlieb was trying to make real. His official job title was Chief of the Chemical Division. His actual job? Figure out how to kill people without anyone knowing it was murder. Gottlieb assembled a team of chemists, biologists, and toxicologists. They worked in a classified laboratory testing hundreds of substances, looking for the perfect poison. And they had very specific requirements. The poison needed to be undetectable in autopsy, fast-acting, deliverable without the target knowing, and ideally mimic natural causes: heart attack, stroke, sudden illness, nothing suspicious. This was the Cold War. The US and Soviet Union weren't fighting with armies. They were fighting with spies, propaganda, and covert operations. And sometimes the easiest way to win was to simply remove the problem. Now, if you've heard of Sidney Gottlieb before, it's probably because of MK-Ultra, the CIA's infamous mind control experiments with LSD and other drugs. Gottlieb ran that program too. One of Gottlieb's favorite discoveries was shellfish toxin. Specifically, saxitoxin, a naturally occurring poison found in certain shellfish. Here's why saxitoxin was perfect. It's incredibly lethal. Just 1 milligram can kill an adult. It's tasteless and odorless. It causes respiratory paralysis within minutes. And in the 1960s, it was virtually undetectable in autopsy. A single drop, delivered correctly, would make someone stop breathing. Doctors would rule it a heart attack or sudden cardiac arrest. No one would suspect murder. So Gottlieb's team started building delivery systems. How do you get poison into someone without them knowing? How do you make it look accidental? For decades, this was all buried in classified files. The American public had no idea. Then came 1975. The Church Committee, a Senate investigation into intelligence abuses, started asking uncomfortable questions, and the CIA was forced to answer. On September 16, 1975, CIA Director William Colby sat before Congress and revealed things that sounded like science fiction. He brought props, and one of them was a gun unlike anything the public had ever seen. It looked like a modified Colt 1911 pistol with a bulky scope and a thick barrel. But it didn't fire bullets. It fired frozen darts filled with shellfish toxin. And it could kill you without leaving evidence. Here's how it worked. The gun used an electrical charge to fire a tiny dart, about the size of a sewing needle, at high velocity. The dart was made of frozen liquid containing shellfish toxin. The freezing served two purposes. It gave the projectile enough mass to fly accurately, and it would melt inside the target's body, leaving almost no trace. When fired at close range, we're talking 100 meters or less, the dart would hit with enough force to penetrate clothing and skin. The target would feel a slight sting, like a mosquito bite. They might not even notice it in a crowded place. Once inside the body, the frozen dart would melt within seconds. The saxitoxin would enter the bloodstream and shut down the nervous system, respiratory paralysis, cardiac arrest, death within minutes. When Congress learned about this weapon, the immediate question was, did you use this? The CIA's answer was complicated. According to official statements, the heart attack gun was developed and tested, but the CIA claimed it was never used operationally. But here's the problem with that answer. During the Cold War, dozens of political figures, journalists, and activists died suddenly of heart attacks or natural causes. Some were targets the CIA wanted eliminated. Some deaths happened right before crucial events. Were some of them natural? Probably. Were any of them the heart attack gun? That's the question we can't answer. Because the CIA's records on operational use of assassination weapons remain heavily classified. What we know is what they chose to reveal in 1975. What we don't know could fill a warehouse. But here's what we do know for certain. The heart attack gun was just one tool in the CIA's arsenal. And compared to some of the other gadgets they developed, it was almost conventional, because Sidney Gottlieb's team didn't just build specialized weapons. They turned ordinary, everyday objects into instruments of death. Things you'd never suspect. Things that could get through any security. Things that could sit on a desk or in a pocket and wait for the perfect moment. For example, here's the poison pen. It looked like any standard ballpoint pen you'd find in an office. You could write with it. It functioned normally, except for one small modification. Hidden inside was a small needle, less than a millimeter in diameter, connected to a reservoir of liquid poison. Press the pen against someone, maybe while reaching past them or handing them a document, and click the top. The needle would extend, pierce the skin, inject the toxin, and retract. The whole thing took less than a second. By the time the target felt the prick, the pen would already be back in your pocket and you'd be walking away. Crowded hallway, busy street, packed elevator. Anywhere two bodies might briefly make contact. That momentary touch could be lethal. Then there was the lethal cigarette. This was particularly devious. The CIA would take a regular cigarette, carefully hollow out a section near the filter, and pack it with a toxic compound, usually botulinum toxin or a fast-acting poison. The first puff or two would be normal, just tobacco. But as the cherry burned closer to the treated section, the heat would vaporize the poison. The target would inhale it directly into their lungs. Death would come quickly. respiratory failure, cardiac arrest, and to observers, just a man who lit up a smoke and suddenly collapsed. Maybe a pre-existing heart condition. Maybe stress, certainly not murder. Speaking of smoking, we need to talk about the CIA's obsession with Fidel Castro. Because when it came to creative assassination methods, Castro was their white whale, Operation Mongoose. The CIA's multi-year, multi-million-dollar effort to eliminate the Cuban leader. And they tried everything. The agency documented over 638 different assassination plots against Castro. Some were serious, some were borderline cartoonish. Let's talk about the weird ones. You guessed it. The first one is the toxic cigar. The CIA knew Castro loved cigars, smoked them constantly, rarely without one. So they obtained his preferred brand and treated them with botulinum toxin, one of the most lethal substances known to man. One cigar contaminated with enough botulinum to kill dozens of people. The plan was to get it into Castro's regular supply through an intermediary. It never reached him. Or if it did, he never smoked that particular cigar. Either way, Castro kept smoking, kept giving speeches, kept surviving.
Decimos y proclamamos que con combatientes cubanos podrá contar el movimiento revolucionario en cualquier rincón de la tierra.
Then the CIA learned that Castro liked to scuba dive. And they thought, what if we put explosives in seashells? I'm not making this up. This was a real proposal. The plan was to create a beautiful, exotic-looking seashell, fill it with explosives, and place it in an area where Castro was known to dive. When he picked it up, thinking he'd found something interesting, it would detonate. The problem? Castro would have to find this specific shell, be intrigued enough to pick it up, and the timing would have to be perfect. Even within the CIA, people thought this was ridiculous. It was never deployed. But the fact that it was seriously considered tells you how desperate or creative they were getting. They also considered giving Castro a contaminated wetsuit as a gift. The suit would be treated with Madura foot fungus and tuberculosis bacteria. The idea was that prolonged contact with the contaminated material would cause a chronic, debilitating disease. Not instant death, just a slow decline. This plan also went nowhere. Turns out getting a communist revolutionary to accept a gift wetsuit from Americans is harder than it sounds. Who knew? But not every gadget was designed to kill outright. Some were meant to discredit, disorient, or destroy reputations. For example, the CIA developed glasses with lenses treated with powerful hallucinogens, LSD or BZ, a powerful deliriant. The target would wear the glasses, and over hours or days absorb enough of the drug through their skin to cause erratic behavior, paranoia, or hallucinations. Imagine a foreign leader suddenly rambling incoherently during a crucial speech, or a diplomat acting paranoid and unstable during negotiations. Their credibility would be destroyed. And no one would suspect the glasses they'd been wearing. Poison pens, lethal cigarettes, toxic cigars, exploding seashells, contaminated wetsuits, drugged glasses. The pattern here is clear. The CIA believed they could turn anything into a weapon if they tried hard enough. And these weren't just theoretical exercises or gadgets collecting dust in a lab. The CIA intended to use these. They did use some of them. The question is, on whom? Because beyond the gadgets, there was a program, a policy, a formal CIA capability to assassinate foreign leaders. It had a code name, Executive Action, and it had a list. Names of people the United States government wanted dead, people who stood in the way of American interests or allied with enemies or simply knew too much. So who was on that list? First and most famously, Fidel Castro. We've already talked about some of the attempts on his life, but let's put this in perspective. The CIA documented 638 different plots to kill or incapacitate Castro between 1960 and 1965. 638 attempts. That's more than one per week for 5 years. Why the obsession? Castro had overthrown a US-backed dictator, nationalized American-owned businesses worth billions, and aligned with the Soviet Union, putting communist missiles 90 miles from Florida. Castro died in 2016 at age 90, in his bed, of natural causes. The CIA never got him. Patrice Lumumba, the first democratically elected Prime Minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo. In 1960, Congo gained independence from Belgium. Lumumba became leader. He was charismatic, idealistic, and he wanted Congo's vast mineral wealth to benefit Congolese people, not Western corporations. He also accepted Soviet support when the West tried to undermine him. That made him a target. In August 1960, CIA headquarters sent a cable to their station chief in Congo. The message was clear: eliminate Lumumba permanently. The method proposed? Poison toothpaste. Sidney Gottlieb personally flew to Congo with a tube of toothpaste laced with poison. The plan was to have an asset replace Lumumba's toothpaste with the contaminated tube. But before the plot could be executed, Lumumba was overthrown in a coup, arrested, and handed over to his enemies. On January 17, 1961, Patrice Lumumba was executed by firing squad. The CIA didn't pull the trigger. Congolese forces and Belgian operatives did. But declassified documents confirm the CIA actively worked to eliminate him. Rafael Trujillo, dictator of the Dominican Republic for 31 years. Trujillo was brutal. His regime killed tens of thousands. But for decades, the US supported him because he was anti-communist and protected American business interests. By 1961, the Kennedy administration had a problem. Trujillo was becoming a liability, and there were fears the Dominican Republic could become another Cuba if instability led to communist influence. So the CIA provided weapons, pistols and rifles, to Dominican dissidents planning to assassinate Trujillo. The US didn't directly pull the trigger, but they armed the people who would. On May 30th, 1961, Trujillo's car was ambushed. He was shot multiple times and killed. Some of the weapons used were traced back to CIA supply chains. When questioned later, the CIA maintained they didn't order the assassination. They just provided the means and encouragement. That's what they called plausible deniability. Ngo Dinh Diem. President of South Vietnam and an American ally, until he wasn't. The US backed Diem for years as a bulwark against North Vietnamese communism. But by 1963, his regime was corrupt, brutal, and losing popular support. Buddhist monks were setting themselves on fire in protest. The Kennedy administration decided Diem had to go not killed, officially, just removed from power in a coup. The CIA communicated with South Vietnamese generals planning a coup, signaling US support and promising not to interfere. On November 1st, 1963, the coup happened. Diem and his brother were captured. The generals promised safe passage if they surrendered. They were executed in the back of an armored personnel carrier shot and stabbed repeatedly. President Kennedy was reportedly shocked when told Diem had been killed. The US wanted him removed, not murdered. But that's the problem with coups. Once you start them, you can't always control how they end. Castro, Lumumba, Trujillo, Diem. These are the ones we know about because they were investigated, declassified, or leaked. But how many others were there? How many names are still redacted in files we haven't seen? The Executive Action Program, the formal CIA assassination capability, existed from the early 1960s through the mid-1970s. Its purpose, in the CIA's own words, was to develop a general standby capability to perform assassinations. Not for specific targets, just the capability, ready when needed. Who authorized these operations? How high did approval go? The Church Committee investigated this exact question. Did presidents directly order assassinations? What they found was a deliberate policy of plausible deniability. Operations were structured so presidents could claim ignorance. Euphemistic language was used. Remove from the scene. Neutralize the threat. Never the word. So did Kennedy order Lumumba's death? Technically, no direct order was documented, but the CIA knew what he wanted and they acted on it. Richard Helms, CIA director during some of these operations, was asked directly, Were these assassination plots authorized by presidents? His answer was carefully crafted. He believed presidents understood what was happening and approved, even if they never said the words explicitly. But by the mid-1970s, the whole program was starting to unravel. Watergate had shattered public trust in government. Journalists were digging into intelligence operations. Congress was asking hard questions. And then came the Church Committee hearings, where the CIA was forced to admit to assassination programs, mind control experiments, and surveillance of American citizens. That moment, Senator Church holding the heart attack gun in a public hearing, was a turning point. The American people saw for the first time the tools their government had built to kill in secret. The reaction was swift and overwhelmingly negative. These gadgets weren't seen as clever Cold War tactics. They were seen as un-American, morally bankrupt, and dangerous. On February 18, 1976, President Gerald Ford signed Executive Order 11,905. Section 5G states, "No employee of the United States government shall engage in or conspire to engage in political assassination." With those words, the CIA's assassination program was officially ended. The gadgets were supposed to be destroyed or locked away. The poisons neutralized, the programs shut down. Sidney Gottlieb retired in 1973 before the hearings. He moved to a commune, raised goats, and refused to speak publicly about his work. He died in 1999. The man who built the CIA's poison laboratory, who developed the heart attack gun, who flew to Congo with lethal toothpaste. He spent his final decades living quietly, insisting he'd only done what his country asked of him. So what happened to the gadgets? Some were destroyed, some were supposedly lost, and some ended up in a museum that almost nobody gets to see. But the truth is, the impulse that created these devices, the desire for undetectable, deniable ways to eliminate threats, that impulse hasn't gone away. It's just evolved. The tools have changed, the technology has advanced. But the fundamental question remains the same. When is it acceptable for a government to kill in secret? And who decides?